This week, much shall be required. I think of the song Ghost Rider by Rollins Band, but slowed down. And when it gets to about the 33-second mark, it just stops. You don't get the satisfaction of the drop. Yet. But when you get it, it's like you don't start the song over, you just turn it back on where it stopped, and you don't get the same momentum. Like you didn't get that. There's like a person at TV shows who like warms up the crowd with comedy and gets them like jazzed up, and you'll have to move forward after all the squares to Saturn without being jazzed. Just like, okay, I'm continuing my thing. Oh, and at the end of the week, we have the full moon. Monday, you might want to feel good, but it's a little bit of an admin hell. I think of the term make hay while the sun shines, except instead of making hay, you shred the incriminating documents while your biggest client is out to lunch with your boss. I just think admin hell. Vibe session. So Monday, the moon starts in Aquarius and it squares Saturn in cold, logical Aquarius. Then it enters Pisces. We're ready to feel good. And the moon slams into Saturn. And then we get a potentially enjoyable sextile from the sun to Pluto. You can use that power. That's why I'm saying make hay, but it's Pluto in the last decan of Capricorn. So somehow our sense of vitality has a potential to beneficially touch corruption at the highest levels. The last aspect the moon makes on Monday is a sextile to Jupiter. So if you take advantage of these opportunities, the end of the day might end on a high note. On Tuesday, it's more of the same, but cranked up. So you might feel empowered by the progress you made on Monday. And Mars sextiles Pluto on Tuesday. So that's a tremendous amount of power available to you. It could also be kind of frustrating. We have Mars squaring Saturn later in the week, and although a sextile to Pluto is for the most part a beneficial opportunity you could take advantage of, tapping into the power, it could also be a little frustrating. Like, there's definitely a lot of heavy lifting this week, and the heavy lifting available to you on Tuesday is a little more satisfying than the heavy lifting that comes later. There's a thing called the drop if you're a hair colorist. Am I wrong about this? Tell me if I'm wrong. So when you're dyeing someone's hair platinum blonde, you can add a tiny, tiny drop of like a violet black or like a blue black, and it keeps it from being brassy. These aspects to Pluto are like the drop. It's just a little bit of darkness, a tiny hint of corruption to make the medicine go down. So you have some opportunities to make improvements. It makes me think of this Mars squaring Pluto. You could even kind of change direction in a beneficial way. Like you see coming down the tracks, there's a split in the tracks, and maybe you need to like turn to the other one, and you can see that coming. Maybe you've seen that coming for a while. Alternately, I think of in a cartoon, it's like a thing that is on the train tracks that like two people are pushing up and down and it makes them go, like making that go from a dead stop. You do some version of it on Monday and Tuesday that's a little more satisfying than the version of it that you have to do later in the week. Or you could do nothing and still be at a standstill later, because you might be at a standstill later anyway. I don't advise that. You should try. You should definitely try. So on Wednesday, as it does this time every year, the sun enters Sagittarius. The beginning of Sagittarius is very focused on a goal. If Sagittarius is like the evangelist preacher, the sun in the first part of Sagittarius, we have our vital force very focused on one goal. And this will be especially pronounced if you have planets in Scorpio and Sagittarius, if you're a Jupiter-ruled native, if you are a Leo, then whatever the sun does, that's going to affect you more loudly than anybody else. Or if you're in a sun-ruled year or a Mars-ruled year, or your profected house coincides with the sign of Scorpio or Sagittarius. This shift from Scorpio to Sagittarius is going to be particularly loud. So earlier, I think of the song Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider is it's a motorcycle rider in flames as a skeleton. It's a flaming skeleton riding a motorcycle as a superhero. When the sun and Mars move into Sagittarius this week, immediately they will slam into Saturn. So that's going to be frustrating. I guess my biggest serving suggestion with this mandatory liaison with Saturn is don't let yourself be crushed by this weight. One thing that's really easy to do and how you can limit yourself is let yourself be crushed by the criticism or if you get in trouble with your dad, if you get in trouble with some authority figure, don't let yourself be crushed, but more on that later. So the sun enters Sagittarius. There's going to be a lot of excitement moving towards a goal, and all of the time in Scorpio, something that Scorpio does is create a current into which everything flows towards Mars in Scorpio winning. So we've had Mars in Scorpio with the sun directing this current. And now with this shift to Sagittarius, you're going to be very excited to get something going. But you're going to meet with a hidden wall, maybe a wall you didn't see. Or even if you're expecting the wall, because I'm telling you about it, it will still rain on your parade. Or like Saturn will like direct the parade off the dock into the cold sea where the parade can't get anyone excited. And then the parade has to walk onto the shore, all wet and cold, and the tuba's full of water and a fish, and it sucks. But you still gotta make the parade go. So also on Wednesday, the moon moves into Aries. Before that, the moon, before that, Venus makes an opposition with Chiron, which I don't really talk about Chiron, but I have been, so I guess that asteroid body wants me to talk about it. Or there are people listening who need to hear about it. Or maybe just I'm saying it for myself. So Venus opposes Chiron. Venus is in Libra with the South Node. Venus in Libra, for the most part, is like good and nice and social and can be fun and refined. But with the South Node there's like a sense of, I don't want to say ennui, but maybe a little, some boredom, some bitterness. Those are very specific versions of what I'm thinking of, but it's like it's not fully present and it's not fully fleshed out. The South Node takes away. So there might be a frustration of like social pleasures that you want not really happening, and that makes you feel dark inside. Or it makes you let go of what you thought you wanted in a way that imparts spiritual benefits and builds character. Anyway, Venus is there doing that, and Venus opposes Chiron, which I like to say Chiron heals you by embarrassing you. So there might be a very sensitive, even though there might be a healing going on, there's like an oversensitivity, detachment. Things are nice and good, but they're wrought with some complications and some old wounds, like sticking your finger into an old wound. I'm saying that because the following day, after the sun squares Saturn, the moon in Aries will conjoin Chiron. So the moon is like the activator of the giant clock we live in. It moves faster than everything else, and it hits all the planets every 27.3 days. So I'm pointing this out. If you're in a Venus ruled year, that might be a tone of like, not great, but in the long run, it's like a feel-good tearjerker movie. Ugh, it's saying this for myself. I'm Libra. So yeah, Wednesday, the sun moves into Sagittarius. The moon later moves into Aries. And on Wednesday, the sun squares Saturn. There's a quote by Charles Dubois that is something about sacrificing what we are for who we could be. The tensions you feel with the sun squaring Saturn could have something to do with that dynamic. With the sun squaring Saturn, yes, you will be met with resistance from authority figures, or just some kind of resistance, maybe just resistance from someone you respect. This album I listened to when I was a senior in high school, and I told one of my friends whose taste in everything I respected, and they were like, honey, you should be embarrassed that you're listening to that. And normally, because I have Saturn right on my sun, normally I'd be like, okay, you're right. But that was kind of a weird turning point in my taste in music or anything, or things I enjoy, where I thought like, you're wrong. I respect your taste in everything, but you're wrong. I like this music. I listened to it recently. It doesn't like hold up all that well, but anyway, there's something inside you that wants to do something. You're going to be met with resistance. Someone once told me that if you're getting a lot of resistance, you're probably making something that's pretty good. There's definitely something to be said for, if you're getting a lot of resistance, listening to the signals, doing a vibe check on yourself and what you're working on. Maybe you do need to correct course. Maybe you do need to accept some criticism. In a way, sometimes if Saturn is rejection, Saturn is also helpful boundaries. So rejection is protection. That's one way to look at it. But the other way is like, you're going to meet with resistance. You're probably making something pretty good if you're wrapped up in this shift from Scorpio to Sagittarius narrative. We all are, but for some people it will be more prominent, whether like this year in their life or natally as a baseline. So listen to that thing inside you. Don't let yourself be crushed by the weight of whatever Saturn brings. And if your parade has to march out of the ocean all cold and wet and full of fish and seaweed, you gotta still keep that energy up. I'm saying this for myself. Oh, also with the Sun squaring Saturn, you could have some bitterness towards authority figures that is rubbing off on them and causing problems. So your bitterness can be sensed by others, and that will affect the situation. Like, if you're feeling weighed down, people are going to pick up on that. So that might just be the nature. That is the quality of the time right now. It will pass. On Friday, Mars enters Sagittarius. I'm personally super excited about this. This is Mars in my 10th house. I'm kidding. Slamming into Saturn, so I'm going to get in trouble publicly, probably. So as of Friday, Mars is applying to Saturn. That is likely to, some of the enthusiasm that you had when the Sun moved into Sagittarius and then met with Saturn and met with that resistance. Now you might be feeling kind of emboldened in like a don't you know I'm loco kind of way, and you might try harder. You might step on the gas even more, and then you'll meet with resistance again. With these aspects to Saturn, the Sun, and Mars, maybe mostly the Sun. I also think of there's in Harry Potter, to get to the platform 9 3/4 or whatever, he has to run through a wall. And at first he runs at the wall and he hits the wall. And a part of it is you have to believe that you're going to go through the wall. So this is a part of that. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is in Taurus right now, focused on practical things. So it might be a little more difficult. Jupiter is more of an airy, fairy planet. But right now Jupiter is in an earth sign, so our minds are drawn toward the practical. We still need to retain a bit of that effervescent belief in ourselves. It might be difficult to access with Jupiter and Taurus and these aspects to Saturn. So, and Mars enters Sagittarius while the moon is in Aries. So the activator, the giant clock we live in, is working for Mars. So we'll all probably feel that shift pretty prominently. Mars also conjoins the North Node a little bit after. Mars enters Sagittarius. So there's a real turning the heat way up. But again, we're going to hit a wall. The moon moves into Taurus later that day. So Friday starts very hot and then calms down a bit. That may be a nice Friday night where there's a lot of energy that we get to leave behind, and then the moon is in Taurus. And we can feel good, even though Uranus is there. So on Saturday, we get Mars squaring Saturn. It happens on Saturday in the morning, but we'll be feeling this all week long. Also, right before that, Mercury enters shadow. So that means Mercury enters the place that it will retrograde back to eventually in January. And so there's a little bit of this Mars squaring Saturn that I used to do a lot of photographic retouching, and something I would do, a little cheap trick I had up my sleeve, was if I had a background that I wanted to extend, I would cut out just a little sliver of that and I would extend it out. Again, if you do any type of photo editing, that's a very cheap trick, but it works if you have something like this wall that's very blank. And I feel there's a little bit of that with this, a little sliver of this Mars Saturn is going to get drawn out all the way into January. But Mercury enters shadow. I made a video about that for the last Mercury retrograde, it's just like a few videos ago. It's about the Mercury entering shadow in Virgo, but a lot of the themes still apply. I might make another one. Anyway, when Mercury enters shadow, it depends on your relationship with Mercury, but I tend to get the most Mercury retrograde problems when Mercury is in shadow. So when it has hit the degree that it will eventually retrograde back to, until it stations retrograde. And it might be because my antennae are up around like what could go wrong, and everything that could possibly go wrong is like, oh, this is going to be a thing for a while. So the shadow period for me is sometimes even more retrograde-y than the actual retrograde. It might also be because I'm like adjusting to like back into the mindset of like, we're in Mercury retrograde now. I myself am always in Mercury retrograde. Anyway, so Mercury enters shadow Saturday. Then Mars completes its heavy square with Saturn. And then on Sunday, we just had the moon hanging out in Taurus, hitting all these outer planets. And it might be like a revisiting of the eclipse energy last month. Last time the moon was in Taurus, we were in between eclipses, experiencing an eclipse and then coming out of eclipse season. So getting a sense of completion for whatever that was about back in October. Then the moon moves into Gemini, and the full moon is on the 27th, I think. Yeah, basically, the full moon is basically Sunday night, because it completes at like 1 a.m. Pacific time, Monday morning. So we have the full moon in Gemini. I wasn't going to talk about it in this video, but I guess I have to talk about it. With this full moon, I think about beating a dead horse. And also, the moon opposes Mars on this day. So, sorry, my cat's doing something important. This full moon, I kind of think of beating a dead horse. We have the energy of Mars opposing the moon on Sunday. The moon will be separating from Mars as it waxes to fullness. But that, like, very full moon in Gemini, very waxing moon opposing Mars, that sounds very bombastic. And I also think of, like, beating a dead horse, belaboring points, not really getting anywhere. The moon is ruled by Mercury in detriment, opposing the moon with Mars. It's very just like, I have a raging headache, I have a fever, I don't feel like talking, but I have to because I'm at a party. It's like that. Jupiter, the ruler of the sun, which causes the moon to become full, is in Taurus. And Jupiter's stationing at the end of December, so Jupiter's very slow. And I think of like arguing with the man behind the curtain. Like in The Wizard of Oz, there's a man behind the curtain. You're arguing with him, but you can't see him, and he's not going to get a lot done for you. Right now, this full moon feels annoying. It could be fun and whimsical if you're into like rolling up your sleeves and joining a fight that has nothing to do with you, or if it does. Anyway, with this squaring Saturn energy, to wrap it up, one thing I will say is you might find that your inhibitions are holding you back, but also your inhibitions are precious. Also remember that your Wi-Fi is a camera that works in the dark. I love you. Goodbye.